Long-time middleweight vets looking to meet in the Octagon in Boston coming up this weekend. We have the former middleweight champ of the UFC, future Hall of Famer, the All-American Chris Weidman. And he's looking to tango with Hawaii's own Brad Tavares. And when you look at a fight like this is going to be Weidman's first action since 2021. He broke his leg tremendously, horrendously at UFC 261 against Uriah Hall. And his kind of return to action has been much documented. In 2021, he was out there and there were rumblings that he was going to have to get more and more surgeries on the leg. In 2022, he was kind of teasing a little bit of a return. In 2023, it looked like it was imminent, and he competed at Polaris 23, so he was getting into a little bit of grappling shape, but he's kind of said it, and I saw it earlier on this week, the UFC Countdown, Weidman talking about just looking to spend time with his kids normally again, and in a lot of different interviews, he did one with UFC Unfiltered with his coach, I guess, or are they even business partners? Because it's long ago Weidman MMA, but with Matt Serra and Jim Norton talking about the fact that when he gets back in the cage, he wants to be able to kick like normal again. So for Chris Weidman, a big
lazy spinning back kicks to get taken down and lose the title?
Well, we'll see. But for Chris Weidman, he really wants to get back to normal. And since fighting Luke Rockhold at UFC 194 and losing his belt, that fight included Weidman's 2-6, so looking to get back to some form of normalcy. And in the wins, he looked amazing UFC Fight Night Long Island when he took on Kelvin Gastelum, and he looked very labored when he took on Omari Akhmedov, wins the first round, loses the second round, wins the third round. Both guys look exhausted at the end of that fight. So Weidman looking to get back in the win column. For Brad Tavares, the same can be said. He's lost his last two in a row. A highly competitive, almost fight of the night style fight against Dricus du Plessis, where Brad Tavares, hey, looked like he wanted to knock a guy out for once. And for Tavares' last time out, he gets finished by Blindado. It was Blindado, Bruno Silva. It wasn't just Bruno. It was the real guy. So for Tavares, that fight was actually back earlier on this year. Kind of a short draw for Tavares after a knockout loss, as bad as that one was. But he looks to come into this fight. And Tavares is an interesting guy because grappling for grappling's sake, he's not that bad. 80% takedown defense in a very long UFC career. And if you do consider it, 22 fights there for Tavares since The Ultimate Fighter 11. He only has 2 knockout wins in that entire span. One guy we won't mention, but the other guy is Krzysztof Jotko. And so for Tavares, it'll be interesting to see, will he go for leg kicks? Because against Dricus du Plessis in a wild striking affair, Tavares threw 6. I'm assuming that's because he didn't want to get taken down. But against Akhmedov, for Tavares' sake, 24 of them. Against Shoeface, 20. Against Jotko, 17. And against Talis Leitis, 23. Brad Tavares, he can kick legs if he decides he wants to.
And he is one of the earlier calf kickers. Like, I remember all the way back when, before it was this huge phase in MMA, it was Benson Henderson, and Brad Tavares didn't get the credit for it, but it always has been a really big portion of his game. And I'm glad that you bring it up, because as of late, he has gotten away from the kicks, at least to the same volume that he was throwing them when he was kind of on his initial rise. But Brad Tavares is another one of these guys who, he's just kind of always been in that 12 to 20 category, and he's never really been able to break through. Now, he has fought really good fighters. He's fought the likes of Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero, like some of the best fighters. Israel Adesanya in a main event one time.
Edmund Shabazian
head kicked him, but that was kind of wild. But that's always been the thing about Brad Tavares. When he is fighting at his peak, he is a 10 to 15 fighter, I would say. Like, he's a very talented fighter, and you bring up the takedown defense numbers, he just has great takedown defense across the board. He can stuff takedowns in the middle of the cage. He does a really good job with his back up against the cage too, and that's a position where we kind of see fighters make or break their careers. If you're bad with your back up against the cage defending takedowns, you're probably not going to have a very long career doing this. But Brad Tavares has always been able to defend takedowns, get his back off the cage, and you can see how physically strong of a guy he is. He does do really well in some of those clinch exchanges, but fighting Chris Weidman at this stage of his career, it's just a great test for both guys. And I hate to say what I'm about to say, but this feels like a budget cut fight for the UFC. Like, both these guys are very well known, but they're not necessarily in their primes anymore. And you might look at Brad Tavares and think, oh, 35? It's a weathered 35, though. Like, he has been in there with some of the best fighters in the world, and he's taken a lot of damage as a result of those high-level fights. But I liken Chris Weidman at this stage of his career, and I hope you appreciate this, because they stole this guy's gold medal in Seoul, Korea. Now, let's look back at his whole career. Y'all must have forgot. Chris Weidman moving up to 205 was a little bit concerning for me, right? We see fighters...
That was the last time that the UFC was in Boston, and Chris Weidman got thumped against Dominic Reyes.
But it doesn't even matter about the result of that fight. I just hate it when a fighter who has had a lot of success suffers a couple losses and they immediately go, let's change weight classes. It's probably going to be the greatest thing for me. Look at Dan Hooker. When Dan Hooker moved from 145 to 155, it was a great career move and he looked really good at 155. Then he moved back down to 145 and Arnold Allen beat the brakes off him, and it was like kind of sad to see that version of Dan Hooker. For Chris Weidman, I know we haven't seen him accept a lot of damage outside of that terrible leg break. The fight against Akhmedov was just one of those grueling fights where it's both guys going for a lot of takedowns. I am going to be curious to see how Chris Weidman does accept some of the damage from Brad Tavares, because you bring it up, Tavares isn't the most heavy-handed fighter out there. When he does sit down on his shots, he can land with good power. Like, the Jocko knockout was a really nice one when he's able to close that distance. They're like chest to chest and he lands a massive overhand. I wonder if he's going to have enough power to hurt a guy like Weidman, because at 39 years old, Weidman is no spring chicken. Like, I don't think we are going to see the Chris Weidman who's going to throw the jab out from distance, who is going to go for a lot of kicks. I think we're going to see a very wrestle-heavy version of Chris Weidman at this stage of his career, and if he does do that against Brad Tavares, it might not even be the best game plan, just because of how good Brad Tavares' takedown defense has been. If he can keep it on the feet and tire out Chris Weidman, I could see Tavares looking really good with his boxing, because for as good as Chris Weidman was, even when he was UFC champion, he was never some dynamic fighter on the feet. He is very basic with his striking, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He has a good jab, he has a good right hand, you bring up the kicks, they're effective, but even when he was champ, he wasn't going out there and winning 15-minute, 25-minute fights just strictly with his striking.
No, and Weidman, I mean, a D1, the nickname right there, All-American, but a D1 wrestler at Hofstra. Who else went to Hofstra, Matt? His buddy, Jean Vellante, the football player. But Matt, for Weidman, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt as well. And we've seen Weidman in this time away doing a lot of other things. I mean, he's on the UFC weigh-in show for the big pay-per-views, and he's having a great time at that. And I bet you when he retires, he'll probably end up with 100%. A job in MMA that way.
He's not going to be one of those guys who has like a sad after career. Like, Chris Weidman has a ton of opportunities when he's done fighting.
The name is Longo and Weidman MMA, so you get that a little bit. And we have a big-time fighter at that gym in the main event of this card. But he's also spent a lot of time at Upstate Karate with Wonder Boy and his dad, training, getting guys ready as well. And we've seen a lot of fighters say, hey, I brought in Chris Weidman to train with for the wrestling's sake. So we'll see how it translates in a matchup like this. Brad Tavares is a pretty heavy favorite in the fight. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprise to us there, to you. Chris Weidman got a rod from about his knee to his ankle. I don't think the fans are going to favor him in this one. I'm going to say over-under 75% Brad Tavares.
I think it'll be under, but it'll be the favorite.
And it is under, I was going to say 70, and I said 75. 896 total votes, 70% Tavares, 60% by decision for the 30% that have Weidman, 76% by decision. Brad Tavares, MMA math, beat Omari Akhmedov. Chris Weidman beat Omari Akhmedov, so that one's interesting. Matt, when you look at a fight like this, who do you have to win in the fight?
I do have Brad Tavares in this matchup just because I'm concerned about what stage of... Like, does Chris Weidman think I'm going to win this and then go on some big run?
No, I think this is like a prove it and then it's done.
And that's kind of what I'm hoping, honestly, because for Chris Weidman, he had a great career, he had a really nice prime, but he has accepted quite a bit of damage at this stage of his career. Remember the Jacare fight? Like, he got flatlined by Jacare.
Vice versa, remember the Vitor Belfort fight, where he's on top, hammering away.
That was 10 years ago, so I'm not as concerned about that fight. My point is, though, for Chris Weidman, I do think we are going to see a much more grapple-heavy version of him in this matchup, and Brad Tavares didn't even get taken down by Yoel Romero that consistently. That's when Yoel was firmly in his prime, so I just think stylistically, I don't think Brad Tavares is going on a run either, let me get that perfectly clear, but I do think he has the counter to what Chris Weidman does well, and for that reason, I have Tavares.
I like Tavares being steady on the feet. If he gets held up, if he gets slowed down, that's where Weidman could take over. We'll see how it makes out with those leg kicks and this not. And you even heard it out of Vicente Luque winning last night, I thought, fairly handily against Dos Anjos. The fact that he was a little tentative in the first round, getting back into actual fighting action. So we'll see how Weidman makes out with the return. We'll see how Brad Tavares makes out coming off of a first round stinger against Bruno Silva. Both of us in this one going with Brad Tavares. Next matchup on the card, it's time, Matt. The young Punisher, Pedro Munhoz. He's taking on Marlon Vera. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.